Thanks for staying with us. So, our hot topic today is about the JAPA, situation. There was a tweet that we saw on social media from Mr. Olukayo Debakari, who said, 4 successful children, 2 living in Canada, 2 living in the US. 2 are doctors, 1 is a nurse, and 1 is an IT expert, and they all have amazing families. But they're all too busy to check up on their mother for over 2 years. Unfortunately, the woman has died. And now they're all planning for a befitting burial for her. A woman who died lonely, sad, and didn't have an opportunity to see her grandchildren who have left years ago. Now, this is a story that's all too familiar, because especially in the last 10 years, that there's a huge exodus of Nigerians who have gone to different parts of the world, and there was no real plan of how to ensure their parents in Nigeria are better, especially those who did not go with the right system, right paper documentation. They can't come back. Those who go with the right papers can actually come back once they do their documentation, but those who just use traveling visa, you can't come back, that's it. So how is it affecting families? How do we ensure that we reduce this this separation that we've experienced in recent times? Interesting, there was a story that happened very recently, about 2 years ago. A man, he was 86. He had about 3 children, and all of them had traveled. They didn't come back. He went to see them 1 or 2 times, but he felt ill. He didn't have the strength to travel. Unfortunately, they couldn't come because they also tried to work on their papers. So they hardly come around, but they just talked to him over the phone. When this man died, he had a bit of money. He didn't have so much money, but he owned a school, a few things here. He handed everything over to his nephew. Who stayed with him, because his nephew and the wife were caring for him, checking up on him. His will was specifically to his nephew and the wife. Unfortunately, the children then came home for burial, hoping to see daddy's property, and the lawyer said, sorry, daddy didn't leave anything for you. And then they are taking that matter to court, saying that they are the biological children of this man and this wealth belongs. So there's a lot of drama going on in this situation. So what are your thoughts? How do we resolve these dramas? How do we prevent it? Or how do we manage it? That's the conversation. You can call us on 081-0764 1679 090 241 You can also send us messages on X and on YouTube. We'll be happy to read your comments. Who'd like to go first, Nima?
Okay, so for me, this story is in 2 parts. The last one you took is about just entitled children, and the other one is, children who lack compassion. And the older I get, the more I see these things. We never used to think about it. We just used to think our parents would live forever, they'll be healthy forever. But the older you get, you start to deal with old age symptoms and other things. And you see this happening. There's a woman, my former cleaner at the office, had to leave to stay with. She had raised her kids. She built a house in town, in Lagos, in the middle of Lagos. She raised her kids, and, for economic reasons, they needed better pay. They moved abroad. And the woman thought they were all doing well. She didn't know, old age and illnesses can happen to her. Now she's alone. And the children said, okay, what we will do is just hire someone to stay with you 24/7. So my cleaner had to leave office work and, spend all her days with the woman. But at night, she still sleeps alone in that old age and everything.
Sad.
And so that's where we expect. The way we are built as Africans, there's always one person left with a parent. And, children are used to giving up some luxuries to care for the older person when they age. But what we see now is that there's so much Oyibo. There was this motivational speaker who was saying, you don't make your kids your old age plan. And it was all focused on the monetary, material part. Like, the kids having to work and give you something was a sin. And blaming the parents for even aging. This is the natural cause of life. When the Quran says, in her weakness, your mother had you. In her weakness, it's a circle of life. That's the way I was raised religious-wise. It's in her illness, in their old age, you then pay back. It's a circle of life. That's the way. It's not about whether you have money, you're broke, you're rich, you're anything. We've become so materialistic. We've lost compassion. Even if it's a few months a year, you need to see your parents. You need to at least see them. Even if you have the wealth to have an entire staff around them, you cannot input in those staff compassion. You can pay them. So because of that, you have to pay unexpected visits along the bloodline to that parent. It's important.
Okay, let Mariam want to jump in?
Yes, I do. And I hear you make a very strong case, for children who lack compassion, but I also know of people who are unable to make these visits, not because they lack compassion or they do not realize that they are meant to visit their family, but they just cannot afford to. Because sometimes it is the difference between making sure I have food on my table and taking care of my family and then paying the ticket fares to Nigeria to come and see the family. And in different ways, they try to keep in touch. They're using their devices. They understand that it is not sufficient. They are heartbroken that they cannot be there, but this is their reality. And so when we talk about this JAPA syndrome and some of the costs that comes with it, this is what we're talking about. I know of people who are so sad because they finally visited their mother. Maybe, they had traveled for many years and then finally came home, visited the mother and left. 2 weeks later, the mom had passed on. And you don't have the money to come back again in 2 weeks, So this is just something that many people are dealing with. And that is why when we talk about making sure that our country works, we're not just talking about, they're just the cost is just so high. What are we saying, when we understand the human angle part of this thing, maybe then we'll wake up and do better. Sometimes these people who are abroad, their parents put all their money together to send them there. First of all, they made that sacrifice. They wanted their children to have a better life or better opportunity. So they understand. In fact, it gives them joy to see that they are thriving where they are. And they understand why they cannot make it back home. So sometimes I would like for us to see that there are people who look at, who are in that situation. Not everyone has that mentality of just being, having no compassion, because there are some people that live in this country with their family and their parents and still don't visit them. Those people clearly have no compassion.
Okay, let me come to you, Tara. What are your thoughts on this?
So, I agree with both of them, but I also want to charge us who are younger parents that soon our children are going to be in the same situation, because many of us have already started sending the kids out earlier. The chances are they're not returning. And so we need to begin to think about how are we going to function? How are we going to design our lives? But I think one of the most important things, though, is to make sure that you invest in a deep, committed, intimate relationship with your children. Sometimes we get carried away thinking that by funding things, that is what building relationships is all about. Unfortunately, it's not. Sometimes the children can come back home, but they don't feel compelled to, because that relationship has not been cultivated enough.
That's true.
And so I would say to us as young parents now that we must invest. And many of us are probably not going to need our children's money, right? Because we've been trained to be more aware financially. We'll put structures in place and what have you. However, remember that it's not going to be all about money. It's going to be also about the deep attachment and intimate relationship that you share with your children, especially fathers. Especially fathers.
We'll come to that in a minute, because there's something Nima touched on that I'd like to also maybe expand on, because she was saying that the natural course of life is such that the expectation is that as I grow older, I want my children. But in this new life, in this new system, the reality where parents now are probably expected to have their own money.
Yes.
Don't tell me to come and start paying your hospital bills or feeding you. So how do we marry that natural course of life where, because I know when I was growing, my mother would say, yes, you're working, I don't need your money. But even if it's 10,000 naira, you buy credit.
Yes.
I don't need it, but just my blessing, God, that my God, my Lord, that will bless you.
Yes.
So that's how, but things are changing.
Yes.
That mommy doesn't need my money. Mommy is Tara Ferraldo, she has a business.
Yes.
I don't need to send her even $10. She's okay. Yeah. So is that now normal? Is that the new normal, or how do we marry both? That's my worry.
I think that we have to think about our context, our cultural context. I train what I'm doing with my children now is, if you go and get a job, you must give your mommy money. You must put down, ask yourself, I'm going to pay tithe. When I finish paying tithe, I'll give grandma X amount, I'll give daddy. This is a training that we're training our children. It's all our responsibility to do so. I think it's about how the children are raised. They are raised to see the importance of giving and generosity. And it's not really only about my parents. It's about generosity of what you have, right? And training them to be generous enough to think that I must buy a gift to my mom, I must buy a gift to my dad, I must send money home to them, not because they necessarily need it, but because it's my own way of showing generosity.
Mike, your thoughts on this JAPA matter?
Well, since I have a daughter that lives abroad, recently I've been thinking, my own mortality is because I'm 63.
Only, please. Only.
No, but I think the mistake that we make as parents is, like Tara said, the long-term plan. For me, in my own household, we lived together, which was the African way before. Was families lived together. Yeah. They didn't. It's the Oyinbo way now that mommy, daddy, in the African way, it was community. It was community, so everybody looked out for each other. So if we start to develop that system again, it will solve this problem of my child is there.
Be realistic, YK. Your child is there because I see what you say. Because I know your household. I know that in that your compound, everybody lives together. We've been there. But your children are likely to do that because they're different parts of the world. So how realistic is that to expect that?
I disagree with you. I disagree with you because it has been
part of them.
You know, that's how they've been brought up. Rolary doesn't come. Rolary tries to make sure she comes home at least once a year. Yeah. At least. Minimum. You know, and sometimes it's twice. Yeah. And when she comes, she doesn't come for 2 weeks. She comes for 2 months, 3 months. She will come. She will, husband.
And she's in that same compound.
And she's in that same compound.
Yeah. So she's accustomed to it, which is about how you're raised.
Right. Yeah. So all of them are in touch with each other. Right. But my brother's son is staying with her now. Even though she's married to an Oyibo who, Oyibo, accept my way.
That's how we
Family
are.
Is
this is how we are.
Yeah. You know? So, Made is, I think, has a good job. He's making enough money to move out of the house. But he has his own place. He has redecorated it, and you know he's there to stay with
that same place.
Compound.
How they are raised.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So
let me go on a very short break. When we come back, we continue this conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Your View will be right back.